We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we can hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us tremendously. The Hands That Save. Chapter 1. The Damaged Hands. London, October 1882. The London autumn had spread its cloak of fog and rain over the British capital, transforming the cobbled streets into grey mirrors that reflected the flickering glow of street lamps. In the elegant quarters of Mayfair, the grand Victorian mansions seemed to defy the gloom with the brilliance of their illuminated windows, promising warmth and refinement for those fortunate enough to be invited within. Ashford Manor blazed with light that evening. Lord and Lady Ashford were hosting one of their celebrated autumn dinners, those society events that brought together the elite of London society. Dukes, earls, lords and ladies mingled in a symphony of rustling silks, glittering jewels, and hushed conversations. Among the guests was Miss Elena Hartwell, aged 26. Elena was what society politely called a spinster, an unmarried woman whose age was beginning to provoke sympathetic murmurs. But it was not her marital status that drew attention that evening. It was her hands. Eleanor had attempted to conceal them with cream silk gloves, but the delicate fabric could not completely hide the traces of her work. Her hands bore the marks of long hours spent in the dispensaries of the East End, those poor quarters of London where she worked as a volunteer nurse for the past 5 years. Light burn scars, caused by handling sterilized instruments, formed small pale spots on her fingers. Her nails, despite all her efforts to care for them, retained stubborn traces of iodine tincture and various medical preparations. Her palms were slightly calloused from carrying basins of water, bandages and medical equipment. "My dear Elena," whispered Lady Pemberton as she approached her near the buffet, "you really should consult a dermatologist for your skin problems. Those marks on your hands are so unfortunate." Elena felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her head high. "These marks testify to my work among those in need, Lady Pemberton." "Oh, good heavens!" exclaimed Lady Pemberton, bringing her fan to her lips. "You're surely not speaking of that hobby of playing nurse in unsavory quarters." The conversation attracted the attention of a small group of guests. Lady Worthington, known for her sharp tongue, joined the exchange with a malicious smile. "How can one ruin such pretty hands with that sort of activity?" she said, ostentatiously examining Elena's gloves. "A lady of your station should preserve her beauty, not sacrifice it for what exactly?" "To help those who suffer," Elena replied with dignity. Sir Reginald Blackwood, a corpulent man with imposing side whiskers, emitted a condescending laugh. "Come now, Miss Hartwell, there are people paid for that sort of work. Why would a lady like you lower herself to such tasks?" "Because those people need care, Sir Reginald, and as a privileged human being I have a duty to help them." "Duty!" repeated Lady Pemberton, laughing. "My dear child, your duty is to make a good marriage and raise children, not to play the saint in slums." The circle widened around Elena. She felt like a caged animal, exposed to mocking gazes and hurtful comments. Some guests whispered among themselves while casting glances at her gloved hands. "Show us these heroic hands, then," called Lord Henley with irony. "After all, if you're so proud of them—" Elena hesitated. Removing her gloves would expose her further to mockery, but keeping them on now seemed cowardly. "Let's see them," insisted Lady Worthington. "We're all very curious to see the proof of your charitable disposition." With courage drawn from deep within herself, Eleanor slowly removed her gloves. Her hands appeared in the golden light of the salon, revealing all the marks of her devotion, the small scars, the persistent stains, the slightly rough skin despite her care. Silence fell over the group, followed by murmurs and stifled laughter. "Good God," murmured a young debutante. How dreadful." "I hope it's not contagious," said Sir Blackwood, stepping back theatrically. Elena felt tears rising to her eyes, but she refused to cry before these people. These hands, they mocked, had bandaged wounds, relieved pain, closed the eyes of the dying. These hands had saved lives. It was at that precise moment that a deep voice rose from behind the group. "Those are hands that save lives." Everyone turned toward the man who had just spoken. Tall, imposing, with dark hair lightly silvered at the temples and intense blue eyes, the Duke of Ravenswood stood there, his gaze fixed on Elena's hands. Alexander Blackthorne, 6th Duke of Ravenswood, was one of the most respected and influential men in England. At 42, he had been widowed for 10 years and had never shown any intention of remarrying, preferring to devote himself to managing his vast estates and his parliamentary responsibilities. "Your Grace," stammered Lady Pemberton, suddenly uncomfortable. The Duke approached Eleanor, completely ignoring the other guests. He gently took one of Eleanor's hands in his and examined it with respect. "This scar," he said, softly touching a small mark on her index finger. "Does it come from a poorly held scalpel?" Elena, surprised by his attention and knowledge, nodded. "Yes, Your Grace. 3 months ago, during an emergency operation." "And this one?" he asked, indicating a brownish stain on her thumb. "Iodine tincture. It won't come off." The Duke smiled, the first warm smile Elena had received all evening. "I've had it on my hands myself after helping our family physician treat an injured farmer." The audience was stunned. A Duke who recognized and respected Elena's nursing work? It was unthinkable. "Miss Hartwell," the Duke continued, keeping her hand in his, "may I ask in which establishment you practice your noble profession?" "I work at the Whitechapel Dispensary, Your Grace, as well as at St. Bartholomew's Hospital." "Whitechapel," the Duke repeated thoughtfully, "one of London's harshest quarters. You must see terrible things. Yes, but also beautiful things. Hope reborn, healing that comes, a life saved." "Exactly," said the Duke, turning to the silent assembly. "These hands," he raised Elena's hand so all could see it, "have touched more true nobility than all our gloved hands combined." Lady Pemberton opened her mouth to protest, but the Duke's gaze silenced her. "You mock a few stains and scars, but I see medals of honor. Each mark tells a story of compassion, courage, sacrifice for others." He returned Elena's hands to her gloves with a tenderness that escaped no one. "If I had a daughter," he declared in a clear voice that carried throughout the salon, "I would hope she would have the courage and nobility of soul of Miss Hartwell." The silence was now total in the salon. The Duke of Ravenswood had just transformed Elena's humiliation into triumph. "Miss Hartwell," he said, bowing slightly, "would you do me the honor of granting me this dance?" Elena, still shocked by this reversal of fortune, nodded, murmuring a barely audible yes. As they walked toward the dance floor, Eleanor heard the murmurs resume behind them, but this time the tone had changed. There was no more mockery, but surprise, curiosity, and perhaps even the beginning of respect. For the first time that evening, Eleanor truly smiled. Chapter 2. The Dance and the Revelation. The waltz began in almost religious silence. All eyes were riveted on the Duke of Ravenswood and Miss Hartwell as they moved gracefully in the center of the dance floor. Alexander guided Elena with natural assurance, and she let herself be carried by his presence, still dazed by the reversal of fortune. "You're trembling," murmured the Duke as they turned in a perfectly synchronized movement. "I'm still in shock from your intervention, Your Grace," Elena confessed. No one had ever, No one had ever defended your work. No one had ever understood its value. Alexander made her turn elegantly before continuing, "Then those people are cruelly lacking in insight." Elena looked up at him. In the golden light of the chandeliers, the Duke's face was even more noble than she had thought. His features were chiseled, marked by experience and maturity, and his blue eyes seemed to see beyond appearances. "May I ask how you know so well the marks left by medical work?" she dared to question. An enigmatic smile touched the Duke's lips. "Let's say I've had the occasion to observe such honorable wounds closely. You mentioned helping your family physician, among other experiences." Eleanor sensed there was a mystery there, but she didn't dare insist. The waltz was coming to an end, and already she dreaded finding herself alone, facing the other guests. As if reading her thoughts, Alexander murmured, "Would you accept to take some air with me? The evening is mild, and I think you need to breathe after the episode earlier." Eleanor nodded gratefully. They walked toward the French doors that led to the terrace of Ashford Manor. The garden was beautifully lit by Venetian lanterns that cast golden light on the last roses of autumn. "Your Grace," Elena began once they were alone, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." "By not thanking me precisely," Alexander replied, leaning against the stone balustrade. "What I said was the truth. Your work deserves respect, not mockery. Not according to society's standards." "Society can be blind," he said with a bitterness that surprised Elena. "It often judges by appearances and misses the essential." He turned toward her, and in the soft light of the garden, Eleanor could see a depth in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. "Tell me about your work," he asked. "Really, what drove you to choose this path?" Eleanor hesitated. Few people had ever asked her this question with real interest. "My younger brother died of tuberculosis when I was 18, she said softly. "Despite all our means, despite the best doctors, we could do nothing. Losing him, I realized that if we, with our fortune and connections, were powerless, what must it be like for the most destitute? And you decided to act. I wanted to learn, understand, and then help in turn." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what my wife would have said." Elena started slightly. The Duke rarely spoke of his late wife. The Duchess was interested in medicine. "Margaret was a doctor," Alexander said simply. Elena thought she had misheard. "Doctor? You mean Dr. Margaret Whitmore, graduate of the London School of Medicine for Women. We married despite the scandal her profession caused." I didn't know." "Few people know. We preferred to be discreet. Society wasn't ready for a Duchess doctor." "And now?" Alexander had a sad smile. "Now it no longer matters. Margaret died 10 years ago while treating victims of a cholera epidemic in the East End." Eleanor felt her heart tighten. She died in service. She contracted the disease she was fighting. Her last words were to ask me to continue her work. Me. A respectful silence settled between them. Elena now understood why the Duke had recognized and respected her damaged hands. He had loved a woman who had devoted her life to healing others. "Have you done it?" she asked softly. "Continued her work?" "In my way. I financed several dispensaries and clinics in the East End, anonymously, of course." "Of course," Elena repeated, understanding that discretion was necessary to preserve his ducal reputation. "But it's not enough," Alexander continued. "Margaret was in the field, hands in the real work of healing. I only write checks." "That's already enormous, Your Grace. Without funding, we couldn't do anything." "Perhaps, but sometimes I would like to do more." Eleanor looked at him with new curiosity. This powerful and respected man hid a vulnerability she would never have suspected. "You could," she said impulsively. "What do you mean?" Come see our dispensaries, meet the patients, see concretely what your donations are used for. Alexander looked at her with surprise. You would invite me to your establishments? If you're really interested. I am interested, he said without hesitation. More than you imagine. At that moment, Lord Ashford's voice rang out from the terrace. Ravenswood, there's where you're hiding. Their host approached, accompanied by several other gentlemen, all smoking cigars and holding glasses of brandy. We were looking for you everywhere, said Lord Ashford. Sir Pemberton would like to discuss the mining bill with you. Alexander sighed imperceptibly. Of course. He turned to Elena and bowed respectfully. Miss Hartwell, this conversation has been enlightening. I hope to have the opportunity to resume it soon. Whenever you wish, Your Grace. Let's say, tomorrow afternoon, at the Whitechapel dispensary? Elena was speechless. You're serious? Very serious. At 3 o'clock. Would that suit you? Perfectly. Then until tomorrow, Miss Hartwell. He kissed her hand with a gallantry that made Eleanor's heart beat faster than she would have wanted, then walked away with the other gentleman. Elena remained alone on the terrace, still incredulous. In the space of one evening, her damaged hands had gone from being a subject of mockery to a symbol of nobility. And now, the Duke of Ravenswood himself wanted to see her work up close. She looked at her gloved hands and smiled. For the first time in a long while, she was proud of them. Chapter 3. In the heart of Whitechapel. The following afternoon, Elena nervously paced the corridors of the Whitechapel dispensary. She had changed clothes 3 times, hesitating between a practical dress for work and something more elegant to receive the Duke. Finally, she had opted for her usual work dress, a simple, dark blue cotton outfit that hid stains well and allowed freedom of movement. The dispensary was a small red brick building squeezed between a textile factory and a noisy pub. The place had nothing prestigious about it, but it served as a medical refuge for the poorest inhabitants of London's most destitute quarter. At 3 o'clock precisely, an elegant black carriage stopped in front of the entrance. Elena saw the Duke descend from it, dressed in a dark suit and overcoat that, despite their sobriety, betrayed their considerable cost. Several street children gathered around the carriage, fascinated by this unusual spectacle in their neighborhood. Alexander gave a few coins to the children with a benevolent smile, then entered the dispensary. Eleanor waited for him in the small reception hall, where a dozen people were already waiting on worn wooden benches. "Your Grace," said Elena, making a small curtsy, "welcome to the Whitechapel dispensary." "Miss Hartwell," Alexander replied, removing his hat, "thank you for welcoming me." Elena noticed that the Duke was observing everything attentively: the faded walls, insufficient lighting, Spartan furniture, but also the meticulous cleanliness and efficient organization despite limited means. "As you can see," said Elena, "we don't have the luxury of private hospitals, but we do our best with what we have." "It's remarkably organized," commented Alexander. "How many patients do you see per day?" "Between 50 and 80, depending on the days. Today is rather quiet." An elderly woman in the waiting room recognized Elena and called to her, "Miss Elena, my grandson is much better since your care." Elena smiled and approached the woman. "How is Tommy, Mrs. Johnson?" "Like a charm. The fever broke, and he's running around everywhere now." Alexander observed this interaction with interest. He saw how Elena spoke to the patients, with respect, tenderness, and warm familiarity that had nothing condescending about it. "Come," said Elena, turning to him. "Let me show you our facilities." She first guided him to the consultation room, where Dr. Harrison, a man in his 60s, with grey hair and expert hands, was examining a feverish child. "Dr. Harrison," said Elena, "allow me to present a benefactor of our dispensary." Alexander had obviously requested to remain anonymous. The physician looked up and, immediately recognizing the Duke, had a moment of surprise that he quickly masked. "Sir," he said, rising, "it's an honor to receive you here." "The honor is mine, Doctor. Please continue your consultation. I'm here to observe, not to disturb." Dr. Harrison resumed his examination, explaining to Elena and the Duke what he was doing. "High fever, swollen glands, probably a throat infection. We'll prescribe rest, saltwater gargles, and monitor the evolution." Elena carefully noted the instructions and prepared a small package of medicines for the child. Alexander observed her precise, economical gestures, the attention she paid to details. "The mother can neither read nor write," Elena explained to the Duke. "I'm going to draw the instructions so she understands when to give the medicines." She drew little suns to indicate times of day and spoons for doses. Alexander was impressed by this practical adaptation to the patient's realities. Then Eleanor took him to see the treatment room, where a young woman was having a hand wound sewn up. "Factory accident," Elena explained while preparing suture material. "Unfortunately, it happens quite often." "You know how to suture?" asked Alexander. "Dr. Harrison taught me. When we're short-staffed, you have to know how to do everything." Elena gently cleaned the wound, applied antiseptic, then began sewing with sure and precise gestures. Alexander observed her hands, those hands that had been mocked the day before, performing precision surgical work. "There," Elena said to the patient, "it's finished. Keep the bandage dry and come back in 3 days so we can check the healing." The woman, with tears of gratitude in her eyes, tried to give a few coins to Elena, who gently refused. "We're here to help you," said Elena. "Keep that money for your family." When they were alone, Alexander murmured, "You refuse to be paid?" "Very few of our patients can pay," Elena explained. "Those who do contribute to medicine costs, but we never refuse to treat someone for lack of money." "How do you finance all this?" "Private donations, charities, and Dr. Harrison works here voluntarily 2 days a week." The afternoon continued with a parade of cases: a malnourished baby, an old man with respiratory problems due to factory fumes, a teenager with a poorly treated fracture. Each time, Elena provided her care with competence and compassion. Around 5 o'clock, as they took a tea break, Alexander said, "I understand now why your hands bear these marks." "Each day brings its share of challenges," Elena agreed. "Yesterday, I had to help with an emergency amputation. The patient had advanced gangrene." "You assisted with an amputation." "I performed it," Elena corrected simply. "Dr. Harrison was at St. Bartholomew's Hospital for an emergency. We had to act quickly." Alexander looked at her with new respect. "You saved his life." "I did what had to be done." That's exactly what Margaret used to say. His late wife's name floated between them like a ghostly presence. Elena felt there was something important there. "Did your wife work in places like this?" "Even worse, sometimes. She went where other doctors refused to go." "You never accompanied her?" "Rarely. I should have. I should have better understood her commitment." There was guilt in his voice, an old wound that had never healed. "She would have been proud to see that you continue her work through your donations," Elena said gently. "Perhaps, but I realized today that giving money isn't enough. One must also give of oneself." At that moment, a man burst into the dispensary carrying an unconscious child in his arms. "Help us!" he cried. "My son! He fell from the roof." Elena immediately rushed forward, Alexander on her heels. The child was breathing faintly, blood flowing from his head. "Put him here," Elena ordered with authority. "Dr. Harrison!" The physician came running, quickly examined the child and paled. "Severe head trauma. He must be transported to the hospital immediately." "My cab!" said Alexander without hesitation. "My carriage is faster." In a few minutes they were transporting the child to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, Elena maintaining a bandage on his head, while Alexander shouted to the coachman to go as fast as possible. The child survived. And that evening, the Duke of Ravenswood understood he had just lived the most important day of his life since his wife's death. Chapter 4: The Transformation. The weeks that followed marked a radical change in Alexander's life. What had begun as a courtesy visit to the Whitechapel dispensary had become a consuming passion. Each day, or almost, the Duke found an excuse to go to the East End, sometimes to bring medical supplies, sometimes to discuss with Dr. Harrison, but always with the secret hope of seeing Elena again. Elena, for her part, was troubled by this constant presence. The Duke was no longer content to observe. He actively participated in care, helping to transport patients, preparing bandages, or simply reassuring worried families. His aristocratic hands, so well groomed during their first meeting, were beginning to bear the marks of this work too. "Your Grace," Elena said one morning, seeing him meticulously arranging surgical instruments, "you'll end up having the same hands as me." Alexander raised his hands to the light. Indeed, a small cut marked his thumb where a scalpel had slipped, and his palms were beginning to harden under the effect of manual work. "It would be an honor," he replied simply. This response stirred a new trouble in Elena's heart. How could this powerful man, accustomed to luxury and privileges, find it honorable to have damaged hands like hers? "May I ask you something, Your Grace?" "Of course." "Why are you doing this? Really, you could content yourself with financing the dispensary from your Mayfair office." Alexander put down the instruments and turned toward her. In his blue eyes, Elena read a vulnerability she didn't know in him. "Because by working here, I feel like I'm finding Margaret again." "How so?" "When she returned from her consultations, she spoke to me of her patients with the same passion as you. Her eyes shone in the same way when she had saved a life. She had this same determination as you when she fought against illness." Elena felt her heart tighten. "I remind you of your wife." "No," said Alexander, looking at her intensely. "You remind me of what love can accomplish." These words hung suspended between them, heavy with meaning. Elena looked away, troubled by the emotion she had read there. "Miss Elena," called Mrs. Johnson from the entrance. "Come quickly. There's been an accident at the factory." They rushed outside and saw a cart arriving with several injured workers. An explosion had occurred in a neighboring chemical factory. The victims suffered from severe burns and inhalation of toxic vapors. "Dr. Harrison is at the hospital," said Elena. "There's only us." "Then let's act," Alexander replied. What followed was a perfectly synchronized ballet. Elena directed operations with the assurance of an experienced surgeon, while Alexander followed her instructions without question. Together they cleaned wounds, applied ointments, bandaged burns. "This one needs to be transported urgently," Elena said, examining an unconscious man. "His lungs are seriously affected." "I'll take care of it," Alexander said, gently lifting the man. They spent the entire afternoon caring, their hands working in concert, passing instruments and bandages in perfect harmony. When the last patient was stabilized, they both collapsed into chairs, exhausted but satisfied. "We saved everyone," Elena murmured. "We," Alexander repeated. "Yes, we did." Elena looked at their hands placed side by side on the table. The Duke's now bore new marks, bloodstains, a slight burn caused by antiseptic, soot traces. They increasingly resembled hers. "Look at your hands, Your Grace. What will society say?" "Let it say what it wants," Alexander replied with a conviction that surprised Elena. "These marks are worth all the titles of nobility." That night, returning home, Eleanor couldn't chase from her mind the image of Alexander bent over the wounded, his aristocratic hands working without disgust in blood and suffering. There was something deeply moving about the transformation of this man, accustomed to privileges, into a devoted healer. The next day, she was surprised not to see him arrive as usual, nor the day after. On the third day, Dr. Harrison explained the reason for his absence. The Duke has been summoned to Parliament to defend a bill on improving working conditions in factories, the doctor said. It seems his recent experience here has motivated him to engage politically. Elena had a moved smile. Alexander was using his influence to extend their common action. A week later, he returned to the dispensary, but this time accompanied by a group of architects and engineers. "Miss Hartwell," he said, approaching her, "I would like to expand the dispensary, add a surgical wing, improve lighting, install running water." Elena was speechless. "But that would cost a fortune. The last victims of the explosion couldn't be operated on here due to lack of equipment. We lost too much time transporting them." "We?" Alexander blushed slightly. "I mean, you lost too much time." Elena smiled. He now naturally included himself in the dispensary's work. "Do you accept?" he asked. "How could I refuse?" "Then consider me as your partner in this enterprise." "My partner?" "If you'll have me." Elena looked at this powerful man who humbly asked her to accept him as a partner in her work. His marked hands testified to his sincerity. "With pleasure, Your Grace, with great pleasure." That day they began planning the dispensary's future together, their damaged hands tracing plans of hope on crumpled paper under the pale light of Whitechapel. Neither of them noticed Dr. Harrison watching them with a smile, recognizing in their growing complicity something he had seen before between the Duke and his first wife. Love, it seemed, was being reborn from ashes, carried by hands that knew how to heal and save. Chapter 5. The Hands That Reveal the Heart. 3 months had passed since the beginning of the dispensary expansion work, and Elena no longer recognized the place. The old, dark and cramped building had been transformed into a true modern medical center. Alexander had kept his word. Operating room equipped with the latest innovations, gas lighting in all rooms, running water, and even a small pharmacy where the most recent medicines were stored. But the most remarkable thing was Alexander's transformation himself. The elegant and distant Duke of old had given way to a man with rolled-up sleeves, who no longer hesitated to dirty his hands to help. His palms now bore permanent calluses, his nails sometimes kept traces of disinfectant, and a scar on his forearm testified to an accident with a scalpel. That morning, Elena found him in the new operating room, sterilizing instruments with a precision she didn't know he possessed. "You do that as if you'd always done it," she remarked. "Margaret had taught me the basics," Alexander replied without looking up. "I'd never had the opportunity to put them into practice. Until now." "Until now," he agreed, finally looking at her. There was a moment of emotionally charged silence. For 3 months, they had worked side by side almost every day, and Elena had seen a troubling complicity grow between them. Their hands often brushed when they passed instruments. Their gazes met over patients, and sometimes Elena caught Alexander watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "Elena," he said suddenly, using her first name without her title for the first time, "may I confide something to you?" "Of course." "When Margaret died, I believed I could never invest myself in anything again. I lived 10 years as an automaton, managing my estates, sitting in Parliament but without really living. And now? Now, thanks to you, I've found meaning in my life again." Elena felt her cheeks flush. "It's not thanks to me. It's thanks to the work we accomplish here." "No," said Alexander, approaching her. "It's thanks to you, to your passion, your devotion, your courage. You've shown me that one could still make a difference." He took her hands in his, those damaged hands they had mocked 3 months earlier. "These hands," he murmured, "have changed my life." Elena trembled slightly. "Alexander, I know it's madness," he continued. "A duke and a nurse, society would never accept it, but I can no longer ignore what I feel." "And what do you feel?" "That I love you," he said simply. "I love you for your courage, your compassion, your refusal to give up in the face of suffering. I love you for these hands that save lives." Elena closed her eyes, overwhelmed by emotion. "Alexander, we come from such different worlds. Perhaps, but we share the same vocation now. We form a team, Elena, a perfect team." At that moment, cries rang out from the dispensary entrance. They rushed and found several women in tears around a 15-year-old girl, unconscious and burning with fever. "It's my daughter Sarah," sobbed a woman. "She started delirious last night, and now she won't wake up." Elena quickly examined the young girl. Very high fever, neck stiffness, skin rash. Her worst fears were confirmed. "Meningitis," she murmured to Alexander. Alexander paled. Meningitis was often fatal and highly contagious. "She must be isolated immediately," Eleanor said, "and we need to notify Dr. Harrison." "I'll go get him," Alexander said. "You take care of her." During the hours that followed, Elena fought against the disease with all her knowledge and experience. She applied cold compresses to bring down the fever, administered the few available medicines, monitored every vital sign. Alexander returned with Dr. Harrison, but also with 3 other doctors he had gone to fetch from London hospitals. "I thought we would need all possible help," he explained. Together they took turns at Sarah's bedside. Elena never left the young girl, holding her hand, speaking to her softly even in her delirium, refusing to abandon hope. At dawn, after 12 hours of relentless struggle, the fever finally began to drop. Sarah opened her eyes and whispered, "Mama!" A cry of joy rose in the room. Elena collapsed in her chair, exhausted but triumphant. Alexander spontaneously took her in his arms. "You saved her," he murmured. "Your hands have saved another life." "Our hands," Elena corrected. "We saved her together." Dr. Harrison, observing the scene, smiled with emotion. "I think it's time for me to retire," he said. "This dispensary has found its new leaders." Elena and Alexander looked at each other, understanding the implication of these words. "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying you form the best medical team I've ever seen, and not just professionally." That evening, Alexander walked Elena home. They walked in silence through the streets of London, their hands sometimes brushing in the darkness. At her door, Elena turned to him. "Alexander, about what you told me this morning." "Forget it if you wish," he said softly. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "It's just that." "I feel something too," she confessed. "For weeks. But I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of the social difference, the scandal, what people will say." Alexander took her damaged hands and brought them to his lips. "My dear Elena, those people who mocked your hands 3 months ago, look at mine now." He showed her his calloused palms, his scars, his nails marked by work. "We have the same hands now," he said, "the same marks of honor. How could society separate us when we've become identical?" Eleanor looked at their intertwined hands, so similar now, both marked by service to others. "You're right," she murmured. "We've become identical." "So?" asked Alexander hopefully. "So yes," Elena said, smiling. "Yes to everything. To you, to us, to our future together." Alexander kissed her then, under a London street lamp, their damaged hands united forever. Chapter 6. The Scandal and Resistance. News of the engagement between the Duke of Ravenswood and Miss Eleanor Hartwell spread through London like wildfire. In the salons of Mayfair, private clubs and society dinners, people spoke of nothing but this scandalous union between one of the kingdom's most respected peers and a simple nurse, Lady Pemberton. The very same who had mocked Elena's hands 3 months earlier organized a tea specifically to comment on the event. "It's absolutely outrageous," she exclaimed before a gathering of high society ladies. "A duke marrying a domestic. What becomes of the social order?" "I heard she bewitched him with her sanctimonious ways," added Lady Worthington venomously. "These women who do charity work are often no better than those they pretend to help." But not all reactions were negative. Lord Ashford, at whose home Elena and Alexander had met, showed himself publicly favourable to this union. "Ravenswood has found in Miss Hartwell a woman worthy of his first wife," he declared at a parliamentary dinner. "Margaret was a doctor. Elena is a nurse. Both dedicate their lives to saving others. I see only coherence and nobility in this." At the Whitechapel dispensary, the reception was quite different. When Eleanor announced her engagement, it was an explosion of joy. Mrs. Johnson, the old patient who had witnessed their first steps together, wept with happiness. "Miss Elena deserves a good husband," she said, wiping her tears. "And his Grace is a good man. You can see it in the way he cares for people." Dr. Harrison seemed delighted but not surprised. "I've watched your love grow day by day," he confided to Elena. "It's beautiful to see two souls find each other in service to others." However, the opposition from aristocratic society soon made itself felt more virulently. Alexander's mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenswood, came to London specifically to dissuade her son. "Alexander," she thundered, bursting into his office in Grosvenor Square, "have you gone mad?" "Good morning, mother," Alexander replied calmly, without looking up from his papers. "I imagine you've come to speak to me about my engagement." "Your engagement? This masquerade, you mean? Marrying a commoner, and not just any commoner, a woman who frequents slums." "A woman who saves lives," Alexander corrected, finally standing up. "A woman who is courageous and devoted. A woman who has turned your mind. Look at your hands." Alexander lowered his eyes to his hands, marked by months of work at the dispensary. "What's shocking about them? They look like a worker's hands. You, a duke. The scandal reflects on the entire family." "The only scandal, mother, is the conditions in which the poorest of our fellow citizens live." "You're delirious. This woman has filled your head with revolutionary ideas." Alexander approached his mother, and in his blue eyes she read inflexible determination. "Mother, I loved Margaret despite your opposition. I married her and was happy. She died serving others, and I was proud of it. Today, I love Elena for the same reasons. I will marry her whatever happens. The king himself disapproves of this union. Then, the king will have to get used to it." The Dowager Duchess left London without having succeeded in swaying her son, but not without having planted other seeds of discord. A few days later, Elena received an unexpected visit in her modest Bloomsbury home. Lady Pemberton and Lady Worthington presented themselves with a look of circumstances. "Miss Hartwell," Lady Pemberton began in a honeyed tone, "we come to propose an arrangement." "An arrangement," Eleanor repeated, inviting them to sit in her small salon. "We understand that the prospect of marrying a duke might turn your head," said Lady Worthington, "but you must understand the implications of your gesture." "What implications?" "The Duke of Ravenswood is one of the pillars of our society. His marriage to you would create a disastrous precedent. Imagine if all aristocrats started marrying their employees." Elena felt anger rising in her. "I am no one's employee. Whatever the term," Lady Pemberton dismissed. "The fact is, you're not of our world. This union can only end badly." "We're prepared to offer you financial compensation," Lady Worthington announced bluntly. £50,000 if you renounce this engagement." Elena stood up abruptly. "Get out of my house." "Think about it," Lady Pemberton insisted. "With this sum, you could open your own hospital. Help even more people." "Get out!" Eleanor repeated, opening the door. Once alone, Eleanor collapsed into an armchair. The attacks were multiplying, the pressures intensifying. Did she have the right to expose Alexander to such a scandal? Was their love worth all these sacrifices? That evening, Alexander came to see her, as he did every day since their engagement. "You seem worried," he remarked, sitting beside her. Elena told him about the visit from Ladies Pemberton and Worthington, then the pressures she was enduring from all sides. "Alexander," she said finally, "perhaps we should reconsider." "Reconsider?" he exclaimed. "Elena, you're surely not thinking of giving up because of these harpies. It's not just about them, your mother, society, the king himself. Everyone is against us." Alexander took her hands in his, those marked hands that had brought them together. "Eleanor, look at me. What do you see?" "A good, noble, generous man." "I see the same thing in you. And do you know what these people see in us? Fear. Fear of seeing their privileged little world questioned." He brought her hands to his lips. "Margaret taught me that true love defies all conventions. Our love was born from our common hands, our common work, our common devotion. How could anyone separate us? And if your reputation suffered, if you lost your social position? My social position is worth nothing if it prevents me from marrying the woman I love." That night, Eleanor made her final decision. She would marry Alexander, whatever society thought. Their damaged hands were the symbol of their union, a union built on service to others and true love. The scandal could rage. Love would triumph. Chapter 7. The Triumph of Love. Alexander and Elena's wedding was set for December 15th, 1882, in the small church of St. Bartholomew, near the hospital of the same name. Alexander had chosen this symbolic location rather than Westminster Cathedral, where his family expected him, thus marking his desire to break with aristocratic conventions. The preparations were eventful. Very few members of high society accepted the invitation, but Alexander and Eleanor cared little. Their true family was the one they had found in the dispensaries of the East End. The day before the wedding, Eleanor received an unexpected visit. Lord Ashford presented himself at her home with an elegant casket. "Miss Hartwell," he said with emotion, "I have something that rightfully belongs to you." He opened the casket and took out a pearl necklace of striking beauty. "This necklace belonged to Duchess Margaret. Alexander had entrusted it to me after her death, unable to bear keeping it, but I think it's time for it to find its place again." Elena contemplated the mother-of-pearl beads that seemed to shine with an inner light. "I cannot accept. It's too precious a memory." "Margaret would have wanted you to wear it," Lord Ashford insisted. "She, who devoted her life to caring for others, would have been proud to know that a woman like you is marrying Alexander." "How can you be so sure?" "Because she once told me, if I die before Alexander, I hope he'll find a woman who understands that true nobility isn't in titles, but in actions." Elena accepted the necklace with emotion. This jewelry created a bond between her and Alexander's first wife, as if Margaret was giving her blessing to their union. On the morning of the wedding, Eleanor woke in her modest Bloomsbury room for the last time. In a few hours, she would be a duchess. This prospect still frightened her, but the thought of Alexander reassured her. She put on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in ivory silk that Lord Ashford had insisted on paying for. Around her neck, Margaret's pearls shone softly. But what caught her attention were her hands. Her bridal hands still bore the marks of her work, a small recent scar on her index finger, iodine stains under her nails, slightly rough skin on her palms. For a moment, Elena thought of hiding them under long gloves. Then she smiled. These hands were her identity, her history, the reason Alexander loved her. She wouldn't hide them. At St. Bartholomew's Church, an unusual crowd had gathered. Not London high society, but the inhabitants of Whitechapel, the dispensary patients, the families Elena had cared for. Mrs. Johnson was in the front row, holding in her arms her grandson whom Elena's care had saved. Dr. Harrison officiated as Elena's spiritual father, having no more family. When the doors opened and Elena appeared, a murmur of admiration ran through the assembly. Alexander waited for her at the altar, magnificent in his dark mourning coat. Beside him stood Lord Ashford, serving as his witness. When Elena walked up the aisle on Dr. Harrison's arm, Alexander couldn't contain his emotion. This courageous and beautiful woman was about to become his wife. "My very dear brothers," began Reverend Thompson, "we are gathered today to celebrate the union of two souls who have found in each other their perfect complementarity." Alexander and Elena exchanged their vows with a sincerity that moved the entire assembly. When it came time to exchange rings, they extended their hands marked by work, without shame or regret. "These hands," said the Reverend, blessing them, "which have cared for, healed, comforted, will now be united in love and service to others." When Alexander kissed Elena to seal their union, the joyful acclamations of the East End inhabitants resonated throughout the church. The reception took place at the Whitechapel Dispensary, transformed for the occasion into a celebration hall. It was a symbolic choice, celebrating their love where it was born, surrounded by those who had benefited from their common devotion. "A speech!" cried Mrs. Johnson. "The Duke must give a speech!" Alexander stood up, holding Elena's hand in his. "My friends," he began, "4 months ago, my wife was mocked in a Mayfair salon for her damaged hands. Today I am proud to bear the same marks as she does." He raised their intertwined hands for all to see. "These hands have taught us that true nobility is not hereditary. It is earned through service to others, through love given without counting, through refusing to look away from suffering." "And now," someone cried from the audience. "Now," Elena replied, standing up in turn, "we will continue together. Alexander and I will run this dispensary, and we will open others. We will train other healers. We will care for other sick people. And we will love each other," added Alexander, kissing her under applause. 6 months later, an article appeared in the London Times that caused a sensation. The Whitechapel Dispensary, directed by the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood, has just been chosen as a model for creating a national network of free care centres. The article was accompanied by a photograph showing Alexander and Eleanor side by side, in work coats, their visibly marked hands placed on an operating table. Lady Pemberton, reading the article in her Mayfair salon, couldn't help but feel a pang of admiration. Those hands she had mocked had become the symbol of a social revolution. That evening, in their new home, a comfortable house near the dispensary, rather than the luxurious Grosvenor Square mansion, Alexander and Elena contemplated their intertwined hands. "Do you have any regrets?" asked Elena. "Only one," Alexander replied. "Which one?" "Not understanding sooner that the beauty of hands isn't measured by their softness, but by the lives they've touched." Eleanor smiled and brought their hands to her lips. "Then we have the most beautiful hands in the world," she said. Outside, in the streets of Whitechapel, life continued, but thanks to two souls who had found each other in service to others, hope shone a little brighter in London's darkest quarters. The hands that saved lives had ended up saving two hearts destined for each other.